Hello, YouTube! My name is Scott, and welcome to another episode of Opinions No One Cares About, a video series that boldly goes... boldly... That's not why I wear the hat. Shut up. Folks, I'd like to introduce you to a man named Benny Russell. Any resemblance to a particular Star Trek captain is entirely coincidental. Same goes for his friends. Benny was a science fiction writer in the 50s, and he was inspired to write a series of stories after an artist showed him a drawing of a space station that should look very familiar to my fellow Trekkies out there. That episode does not end well. Benny gets furious when a message comes down from above, basically saying, yeah, we're not publishing your story because your main character is black. Also, you're fired for doing that, and probably for being a black man with a dream in 1950s America. Glossing over the end of the episode, where Benny has a full-on breakdown and gets committed, the tonal shift I want here seems a little difficult, going from that to suggesting that Benny Russell is the real creator of Star Trek. If we take this seriously, then we can suggest that DS9 is the original Star Trek, and everything else is just fanfiction. I'll even throw in my theory that Benny Russell is shown as an in-universe author because someone figured out who wrote the original DS9 stories and added him as a subtle reference in Strange New Worlds. But what I won't accept is Voyager. I recently finished watching this series all the way through for the first time. And while I admit it's a lot like other Trek series, with some episodes that are great, some that shouldn't be mentioned again, and some that I personally think are better than their reputation, I prefer to go with this theory. If Benny Russell wrote DS9, is Voyager bad fanfiction? To answer that question, we have to ask what exactly constitutes bad fanfiction. The thing is, there's not a lot that's exclusive to bad fanfic. Anything that's ever been written can have spelling or grammar errors, plot holes, badly developed characters. Honestly, even if it's not a decent adaptation of its source material, that's not a deal breaker. It could just be the author imagining a new direction for the story. So if I have to start somewhere, let's say bad character development. Which is ironic because there are some decently developed characters on Voyager. For example, the Doctor. Yeah, I wish. The Doctor is the ship's emergency medical hologram, activated when Voyager's chief medical officer is killed in the pilot. And over the course of the show's run, the Doctor improves on his own program, creates himself a family, learns to sing. There's even a Measure of a Man-esque episode where the Doctor has written a holonovel, and after it's published in the Alpha Quadrant, he has to appear in court and fight for his rights as an autonomous being. The Doctor gets more character development than I'm giving him credit for here, and he's not even real! But if he's not your style, how about 7 of 9? A Borg drone severed from the Collective, who became part of both Voyager's crew and the Berman Braga era of Trek's apparent need for eye candy that stood out by not being in a traditional uniform. We watched Seven's quest to regain her humanity through about half of Voyager's run, and she eventually came back in Star Trek Picard, where she helped to save the future, joined Starfleet, and became captain of the Enterprise. I know I should sound happier than that, but that ship isn't technically the Enterprise. There's a whole backstory there, and if you're a Trekkie, you probably know it already. But we're here to talk about bad characters. Or badly developed ones, anyway. So let's start with Commander Chakotay. Chakotay is a pretty good first officer for someone who left Starfleet to join the Maquis. But did you know he's also a boxer? If you're a Trekkie watching this, you probably did. But you also know that it didn't come up until the 5th season. Almost like someone realized his backstory should be more than vaguely defined Native American, but no one got the memo for a few years. Slight side note, Chakotay's entire Native American identity, down to the rituals he performed, was a random mix of traditions from multiple tribes, rather than picking one and staying with it. Almost like a bad fanfiction writer didn't want to do research. The same thing applies to his relationship with 7 of 9, which felt shoehorned into the last season. Look, I'm not a JC shipper, but given the amount of time Chakotay spent with Janeway, having dinner, or making her bathtubs, actual thing, suddenly shifting his focus to 7 near the end of the series just seems like bad writing. Although that's not as bad, character-wise, as how it seemed like the Native American guy kept discovering all the primitive races in the Delta Quadrant, or his tendency to crash shuttlecraft, or his getting stranded back in the Delta Quadrant thanks to Star Trek Prodigy. Now, there's going to be a whole thing here about, save Star Trek Prodigy since its future was up in the air at one point. But that's been resolved, and I didn't actually need to bring it up, so I'm just going to circle back like I planned to originally. Speaking of shuttlecraft, consider the Delta Flyer. They're a new kind of shuttlecraft that got replaced surprisingly easily given Voyager's near constant struggle to obtain supplies. Now, in a jarring segue, let's talk about its creator.
The creator of Fairhaven, Captain Proton himself, Lieutenant Tom Paris.
Tom Paris was literally pulled out of jail to serve on Voyager. He's the hotshot helmsman of the crew, an aficionado of 20th century culture, the creator of the Delta Flyer, as I previously mentioned, and kind of a Mary Sue. Allow me to quote Wikipedia here. A Mary Sue is a character archetype in fiction, usually a young woman, who is often portrayed as inexplicably competent across all domains, gifted with unique talents or powers, liked or respected by most other characters, unrealistically free of weaknesses, extremely attractive, innately virtuous, and or generally lacking meaningful character flaws. The male version is sometimes referred to as a Gary Sue, but Star Trek already has Gary 7, so let's stick with this. Tom Paris is surprisingly competent. He's a capable starship pilot who also knew enough engineering to create the Delta Flyer, enough computer programming to create the village of Fairhaven, the bar known as Sandrines, and recreate the Captain Proton serials, and enough medical training to serve as the doctor's assistant in sickbay. Pretty competent. Almost inexplicably. And it could be argued that Tom's love of 20th century Earth culture is a unique power, considering how often it seemed to come in handy in the Delta Quadrant in the 24th century. As for the rest of the list, respect tended to ebb and flow, but it was generally high for him. He could be considered innately virtuous, I guess. I don't really know about attractive. There wasn't much in the way of weaknesses or character flaws, at least not ones that he couldn't turn to his advantage. But I do think there was one example that would cement Tom's Mary Sue status. The episode 30 Days starts and ends with Tom being demoted for disobeying a direct order because it's told in mostly flashback. And even within the context of the episode, it's a gray area because he was doing the right thing. Even when Thomas Eugene Mary Sue Paris is wrong, he's right. But that's not all. Roughly a year later, the episode Unimatrix Zero begins with Tom coming onto the bridge. And guess what? He's been promoted back to Lieutenant Junior grade. Why? Just because, apparently. It really looks like it happened because Tom was the writer's favorite character and, I don't know, he'd suffered enough. And yes, if this was bad fan fiction, Tom could have leapfrogged a few ranks and become lieutenant commander or something. But I think even the writers realized that was a bad idea. But Tom's promotion has no bearing on the rest of the episode. It's about Seven and the Borg, but I'll be talking about them later. Because I have to bring up this part of that scene.
I didn't notice a little box on my chair.
Oh, Harry. This is Harry Kim, the ops officer who was fresh out of the academy before winding up in the Delta Quadrant. And this poor bastard. Even a casual look at what happened to Harry over the course of Voyager would make you wonder what cosmic entity he pissed off. Did Q and Trelane have a bet going? I mean, is Harry their little Job? Where to start? At the beginning? Technically, no. Voyager being transported to the Delta Quadrant affected everyone, not Harry specifically. So, let's see. There was the time he managed to be captured while on the holodeck, or the time a transporter accident shifted him into an alternate reality where he never served on Voyager, or the time he was falsely accused of a terrorist bombing and imprisoned on a space station, and forced to fight with all the other prisoners who didn't seem to like him for some reason, maybe just because Harry Kim must suffer. He got infected with alien DNA and thought his real home planet was in the Delta Quadrant, but it turned out to be a trap set by sexy DNA vampires. Yes, really. He was attacked and infected by species 8472. To be fair, he did help Tom create Fairhaven, but a glitch in the program got them captured by the townsfolk who were convinced that they were evil spirits. And that's not everything that happened to Harry. Far from it. I didn't even include the times when he was actually in command of Voyager. Spoilers, he had problems. And then there's Harry's love life. Or lack thereof. Harry had a girlfriend before winding up in the Delta Quadrant, but old Mary Sue Paris convinced him to start dating. Which led to, first off, his infatuation with the wrong Delaney twin, which became kind of a running joke. But there was also the hologram being remotely operated by an alien, which became infatuated with both him and Tuvok, a fellow crewmate who was killed, but resurrected by aliens who pumped so much of their DNA into her that she was no longer human, or the woman he met while competing in a literal space race, only to find out she was trying to sabotage it.
hence the phaser. Or even the woman he fell in love with so deeply that it formed a biological bond that he needed medicine to be cured from. Poor Harry was even infatuated with Seven of Nine for a while, but that couldn't go anywhere because then how would they have shoehorned in a relationship for Chakotay later?
Well, as they don't say, unlucky in love, unlucky everywhere else. But anyway, I didn't mean to turn this into the Harry Kim show, but there are a couple other things I need to talk about. First, how about the fact that over the course of this show, Harry died 4 times? Now, 2 of them are future versions that wind up not existing, so technically you could say they don't count. And of one of the other 2, he was barely dead long enough to matter and brought back to life by medicine. But the last one, oh boy.
So Voyager had a little bit of an accident, and while trying to fix it, yeah, Harry got sucked out into space. Go directly to death, do not pass go, do not collect 200 strips of gold-pressed latinum. But it's okay. See, at the time, Voyager was undergoing a sort of Siamese twin moment. 2 Voyagers sharing certain parts. And the Harry that didn't die simply moved over to the ship that survived. What a lucky and totally not badly written chance.
I'm sure you're asking why the writer of this obvious bad fanfiction would even keep Harry around, but wait a minute, I'm still not done. Take a look at this. I took this shot specifically from the very last episode. You notice Harry's neck and that 1 pip that designates his rank as ensign? 7 years in the Delta Quadrant, and that never changed. This man literally died and still couldn't get promoted. Now, this could also be a behind-the-scenes issue, as Harry's 7-year record as an ensign was later, or earlier, depending on how you look at it, broken by ensigns Mayweather and Sato on Enterprise. Not a good look for the Berman Braga era that their longest-serving ensigns are all minorities. But I digress. Why did Harry have to suffer? I think it has to do with his best friend. Say it with me, Tom Paris. See, I have this theory that the writer of this bad fanfiction was casting himself as Mary Sue. Tom. And Harry's character was based on someone that was absolutely terrible to them. Possibly named Jay Osaka, as that was almost Harry's name, but maybe the writer thought that was a little too obvious. So that gets rewritten, and Tom is totally awesome and great at everything, and the person forced to be his best friend fails again and again and again and again, and you get it. P.S. I could have included the fact that Harry switches from playing the clarinet to the saxophone as an example of bad writing, but I have a friend who teaches music who says that's actually a common occurrence, so they got one thing right. But I've talked about Harry enough, because it's not just bad characters that make bad fanfiction, there's also bad writing. It's like the writer said, okay, I have this new Star Trek story, it takes place in the Delta Quadrant where humans have never been, but no matter how improbable the circumstances may be, I do need to link it back to established canon every once in a while.
Which is how we got things like the beliefs of Chakotay's people, such as they are, being a gift to his ancestors from Delta Quadrant aliens who happened to come to Earth 45,000 years ago. Or the Voth, reptilian humanoids who come across a dead Voyager crew member and use his bones to figure out that they descended from dinosaurs who left Earth before the asteroid hit. Or the time they came across a rocket from Earth's space program, circa 2030, that got sucked up by an anomaly. Or if you prefer, the interaction with a time traveler that got Voyager thrown back in time to 1996 Los Angeles. Because reasons. Bad writing reasons. How about when they found another Starfleet ship? In the Delta Quadrant. They even found Amelia Earhart. In the Delta Quadrant.
And of course they couldn't go without coming across some random Alpha Quadrant races.
Like these 2 Ferengi, who went through the wrong wormhole and decided to take over the economy of a Delta Quadrant planet because, hey, Ferengi gonna Ferengi. Or the crew of this Klingon generational ship, some of whom believed that their search for the savior of their race had ended when they found Tom and B'Elanna's unborn daughter. Even the Q show up, although they're not really tied to any one part of the galaxy.
But this is where I want to bring back the Borg. Remember the first time you saw the Borg? There were these emotionless beings using nanotechnology to conquer other races through assimilation.
We learned that the Borg were so advanced that not only could they adapt to weapons used against them, which seems like an argument for melee weapons, but whatever, but their ships, or cubes if you prefer, could heal themselves as well.
The Borg of TNG were scary as hell, and rightfully so. They assimilated Picard, attacked at Wolf 359, which was not an inside job, Levy, and apparently played a really long game to take over Starfleet as we saw in Picard. But the Borg of Voyager, let's face it, the entire collective gets neutered. And I'm not just talking about the relative ease with which Seven was separated. Before Voyager, no self-respecting Starfleet ship would want to be in the same sector as a Borg cube. But in the Delta Quadrant, on their home turf, the Voyager crew have no problem taking them on. The species that had no problem taking out 39 ships with one cube at Wolf 359, quiet Levy, are repeatedly beaten by a little Intrepid-class ship.
Janeway actually makes an alliance with the Borg at one point to deal with Species 8472, and the Borg go back on that deal, but Janeway was fully expecting that, so Voyager gets away. They have no problem flying straight into Borg Central here, which is just what I call it, but the Queen is there, there are Borg crawling all over the place, and they still manage to get out without a scratch. They even get some of the crew assimilated on purpose, not the behavior one would expect towards an enemy you're supposedly afraid of.
The Borg were scary once, remember? But Voyager chopped their collective, pun definitely intended, balls off. Taking one of the biggest villains in the universe and reducing them to this? Bad author, bad writing. Now, at this point, I was going to go off about a bunch of bad episodes, and there are plenty. I mean, what to choose from? Tom Paris being the first pilot to reach Warp 10, but then somehow hyper-evolving and dragging Janeway along until they both became catfish? Aliens randomly stealing Neelix's lungs? Civil War-themed Q-sex? An advanced species that becomes infatuated with the Doctor after hearing him hum a tune because somehow they don't know what music is? No, I'm ending this with what feels to me like the worst example of bad writing. It kind of seems like the writer came up with an idea to end their story, decided they didn't like it, and rewrote it on the fly because that's kind of what happened. I'm talking about the final episode, Endgame.
Picture it, Earth 2404. It's the 10-year anniversary of Voyager's triumphant return after spending 23 years in the Delta Quadrant. Everyone seems happy enough. I mean, Harry's a captain now. It took a while, but he got there. Tom Paris is a successful holo-novel author, and the Doctor has settled down with a real person. Unfortunately, it isn't a happy ending for everyone. It turns out Tuvok had a degenerative neurological disorder that could have been cured if they had never left the Alpha Quadrant, so he's not doing that great.
Also, Seven died on an away mission, and her husband Chakotay, I know, never got over it before apparently dying, right after they got home? Look at the date on that grave. But anyway, since there wasn't a happy ending for the 3 crew members she was closest to, Janeway decides she doesn't have to take this. Temporal Prime Directive be damned. I mean, where was the Temporal Integrity Commission through all this? The agency that warned Janeway specifically against time travel? Do we just assume, this was always supposed to happen? Or did the terrible writer of this terrible fanfiction forget?
Hey, you've messed with time too,
Not the time, man! Anyway, I realize I kind of gave away what's going to happen, but do you realize how old this show is?
Armed with a souped-up shuttlecraft, Admiral Janeway tells the TIC to fuck all the way off, presumably off-screen, and travels back in time and space to a point in the past where Voyager avoided a nebula because it was full of Borg. Inside the nebula was a transwarp corridor that led to one of the Borg's transwarp hubs, a connection point for conduits all over the galaxy. Kind of like the Port Authority, but with fewer homeless junkies.
Or maybe the same amount, I don't know.
The Admiral meets up with her younger self, convinces her to go back to the transwarp hub, is captured by the Borg, brought before the Queen and assimilated, but bitch slaps them one last time thanks to a helpful little pathogen she had in her blood, and dies as Voyager destroys the hub and makes it home.
So future Janeway basically said, to hell with this future where most of my crew is happy and content. A couple of the ones I liked most died. This shall not stand! What's the point of showing the future from the first part of the episode if you're just going to erase it anyway? If you're writing fanfiction, this is the kind of editing you do before you put the story up. Don't post it for everyone to see. You don't see this from other Starfleet captains, altering history because it serves them personally. Picard never even considered stopping the Borg from assimilating him, even when it led to the takeover of Starfleet. Sisko had the power of the prophets on his side, and they don't even understand linear time. But he never looked for a temporal solution to the Dominion War, even after In the Pale Moonlight cost him his self-respect.
I think I can live with it.
Kirk not only didn't save Edith Keeler's life, he also went back in time in Star Trek IV, the one with the whales, and never once thought, hey, I could go back a few days before we left and stop those Klingon bastards from killing my son. Admittedly, Spock did change things in yesteryear, but that was because he had ceased to exist, and the galaxy needs Spock. Michael Burnham went forward in time, but never thought, maybe I should stop off and prevent the Battle of the Binary Stars. And Pike saw his future, tried to prevent it, and found out what would happen if he did, so he actually learned his lesson. But Janeway didn't, because the bad writer's story came to an end, but only most of the characters had happy endings, which is the writer's own fault, by the way. Throwing in a time travel plot device at the literal last minute is just bad writing no matter how you look at it. Plus, it wouldn't surprise me if the author was just looking for one more chance to screw Harry over again. Seriously, dude, what did you do? I'm calling it here. I've rambled long enough. Star Trek Voyager is just bad fan fiction with some decent elements thrown in. And some good ones. And, okay, I'm not getting into that right now, but hashtag Janeway did nothing wrong. I will die on that hill. Seriously, it's a nice hill. It's right over there. I'll go now. You know, doing that, I realized that's not really a very good ending. So I tied it right back into the theme. Thank you and good night. Hey everybody, thanks for sticking around till the end of my longest video to date. I hope you liked it. If you're a Trekkie, I hope you noticed that I managed to reference every series. Either way, I hope you do all the usual YouTube stuff, like the video, comment on it, share it around, subscribe if you're so inclined, smash that bell below for notifications for when another one goes up. So before I sign off, I have to give thanks. I don't know if you know this, but I am one of many co-hosts of a weekly live stream over on the channel Best of Trek, Worst of Trek. The stream is called Buffer Time, and without the help of my fellow co-hosts, this video would not be nearly as good, let's say, as it is. So with that in mind, I need to thank the incomparable Del Tashlin, Robbie Sherman of Conversations with Robbie Sherman, Lieutenant Commander Eve Zellick of Starfleet International, Vanessa of the YouTube channel I Love Bad Star Trek, and the creator of Best of Trek, Worst of Trek, Dustin Wing, whose help was so invaluable in this. I was talking to him about how I needed a certain number of clips, and he went out and found all of them. It was amazing how much work he put in considering he has his own videos to work on. If this show had credits, he'd be an assistant producer on this one. And it's on his channel that our live stream, Buffer Time, is on every week, or we try to, at 2 p.m. Eastern Time on Sundays, although we're looking to change that. So either way, just check out the old playlist, We do some good work, I think. That being said, I have been Scott, and this has been Opinions No One Cares About. Everyone has opinions. This one was mine.